Okay, everybody. Hi. Uh, I am looking at case study 3, and we're analyzing that through Brofenbrenner's bioecological model again here. Okay, so my goals for this presentation are we're going to explain the PPCT model, which is Brofenbrenner's bioecological model, again, and then we're going to analyze our kind of like main character of our case study, John Davies, his development through the PPCT model. Okay, so we're going to go through a couple of different things. I'm going to break it down in a similar way to the last one I did. So I want to do an introduction. This is going to be pretty lengthy because I want to explain PPCT again, and I want to go over the struggle of a lifetime, which is the case study that we're looking at pretty in depth so that the rest of it kind of flows and makes sense and everyone has the context for what we're talking about. Okay, we're going to look at the process lens, person lens, context lens, and time lens. I'm going to put it all together, say, like, what can we see about this individual's development based off of this model, and then just kind of references. Okay, so looking at the PPCT model first, we've got this developed by Yuri Brofenbrenner. Uh, it analyzes how outside influences, how the environment affects adolescent development. And so we look at 4 domains here. We look at process, person, context, and time. That's why it's PPCT. And for it to work, you have to combine all the 4 domains together to get a full picture of your adolescence development. Okay, so going through uh, the struggle of a lifetime, that case study, this is a personal account of a college senior who is really attempting to find himself. He's in kind of that later adolescence. Uh, in our textbook of Steinberg, he talks about how adolescence is longer now than it was before, and that's certainly the case for John here. His adolescence has been extended into his senior year of college. So he should be about 22 at the time that he writes this. John Davies is a college senior. He's from a small town in kind of southwestern slash south central Pennsylvania. Uh, it's a historically poor town. It's a coal town. And John's family is one of the few that has money. Uh, his family, his grandfather seems to run some kind of like oil, but also coal business. Uh, and that affects him a lot. His relationship with his grandfather, I would say, affects him quite a lot. John is intellectually gifted. He's a hard worker, but he comes from a family that doesn't really discuss feelings or emotions, not with each other. He says he gets that from his dad, that his dad has influenced his family to just not really talk about how they feel. John is sent to a school for academically gifted students. He's the only person from his town that's there, and it really makes him an outsider in this community. He feels very different. His parents can't drive him to all of these like hangouts with other people from this school because they're all like the children of more affluent members of society. So a lot of them are the children of doctors and lawyers. And so he's from this coal town, and he's the only person that's there from his town. In high school, he's involved in a lot of different extracurricular activities. He excels in all of them, to the point where he's brought to Europe to tour with like kind of his chorus, and that's really a turning point for him. Uh, and because of that, because of what he sees in Europe, all of these people who like really care about what they're doing, uh, John really feels burnt out by senior year and he's very disillusioned with his high school. He feels that students aren't really trying, teachers aren't really trying. He seems to be the only person that's giving much effort. He describes himself as intelligent, honest, responsible, kind, and helpful. But he struggles with feeling othered and he struggles with feeling not like other kids his age due to all of this pressure. He really doesn't fit in. He's a loner. He never talks about really having any close friends. Uh, he sees a lot of his identity, he puts it into him being Christian and being a Boy Scout are like really big deals for him. He's valedictorian of his class, although he says that it feels a lot like a hollow victory at the end there when he gets to be valedictorian because it's just kind of a pat on the back on stage, and then he moves on. John sees college as this opportunity to change his identity, to become someone new, to not be the kind of Boy Scout, like good guy, role model that is expected of him, uh, back in his hometown. So he wants to focus kind of less on academics, focus more on joining a fraternity and being more social. But in his freshman year, he still achieves very highly. He maintains like a near 4.0 GPA, is what he says. So John spends a lot of his sophomore year, so the fall of his sophomore year in Russia. He's minoring in Russian at the time. He has this goal of working for the State Department, uh, and focusing on Russia. But when he gets to Russia, he notices that his roommates are kind of out, they're partying, they're drinking, they're having sex. Uh, and it forces him in Russia to also confront this extreme need and poverty that he sees, uh, which turns him kind of to the Christian church even more, and he feels even more othered. Uh, he prays with old women on the street, then he goes back to his apartment, and these guys that he's rooming with are all kind of doing things that he would never allow himself to do. Upon his return, John looks for a new church. He feels that his church isn't doing a whole lot of outreach, and he wants to do that. So he becomes part of campus outreach. Uh, he focuses on becoming a mentor to others through the Boy Scouts and through his church. But he has this lack of friends, and throughout his adolescence until like the time of the story when he is 22, when he gives this account, he still just has no real close friends. Uh, he is thinking about becoming a clergyman in the Anglican Church. That's the church he ends up joining. Uh, and he really has this turning point with the death of Matthew Shepard, that makes him want to devote more time to outreach. So this death of Matthew Shepard really brings up a lot of conflicting feelings in John. Uh, the church has this welcoming message. His college campus has a very like welcoming message. But when they hold a vigil for Matthew Shepard, he ends up having to listen to all of these personal stories of minority students who have been targeted on campus, and a church that is not welcoming. And he runs into the same thing with the Boy Scouts, where they are not welcoming to LGBTQ folks, and that makes it very difficult for him. He ends up developing kind of what I would describe as a bordering on the edge of a pornography addiction. Uh, he becomes very obsessed with pornography at some point, and that really makes him question his sexuality, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Uh, he really lacks this personal identity outside of academic achievement and being kind of like better than others academically. And he's very afraid of being homosexual, due to this like pornography addiction and these sexual fantasies. He has these fantasies that involve men and women, so he wonders if he's gay, if he's bisexual. He's just not really sure. Uh, but he eventually realizes that he's not actually lustful for men. He's jealous of them. He wants to be them more than he wants to be with them. So he decides to try to grow his own self-confidence through like self-care. So he works out, he studies his Bible a little bit more, uh, and he realizes that he's spending a lot of time pitying himself instead of trying to work on himself. So this is a big like turning point of growth and maturity for him. So he decides to become a mentor for adolescent boys, especially through the Boy Scouts, but he's stuck between these personal views of like equality and justice and equity and inclusion. and these like homophobic policies of the Boy Scouts. Uh, so he's driven to this life of service, and he begins to volunteer in low-income housing in a low-income housing development during his senior year. But he struggles a lot with what it means to be a Christian, and what that means in the long term, and like what does that mean for the rest of his life? And he calls it the struggle of a lifetime. Okay, so we're going to look at this through the process lens first. How does someone interact with their immediate environment? What do they want? What do they avoid? Is what we're looking at here. So for John, how does John interact with his immediate environment? He's born into a family that he considers very close, but they don't talk about their feelings ever. He never has any close friends. He describes himself as a loner. He's not part of any crowds or cliques. He's just kind of on the outside looking in. Uh, he describes himself at one point as like having a foot in a lot of different friend groups, but never really feeling like he had friends. He sees himself as a role model for his peers, and he's a hardworking, high-achieving student throughout grade school and into college. John wants to achieve highly. He wants to be at the top of his class. He wants that validation from the adults in his life as being responsible and intelligent and helpful. Uh, he needs to be in control. He has this need to control his environment. He's very confused why all of these like other college boys and even high school, why all these high schoolers love to drink so much, why they like to go out and party. And he tries to go to frat parties, but he gets there and he sees all of these people who are flirting and they're drunk and they aren't in control of themselves. And he goes, "This isn't for me." And then he has to wonder, what is for me? Uh, Ultimately, he finds himself wanting to be in service of others. But he struggles with this idea of injustice and inequality. But what he wants is he wants to help people. He wants to guide people. He wants to be a mentor to others. He avoids partying. He avoids sex. Earlier in his adolescence, it's because of this need to be a role model. It's this need to uh, be kind of viewed positively by the adults in his life. But later it seems like it's more of a need for control, and it leads him to avoid alcohol and drugs and sex. He's still a virgin by the end of the kind of personal account. So looking at the person lens, what characteristics make him an individual? What are his resources, and how does that affect his treatment by others? So what makes him an individual? What makes John himself? So he describes himself as responsible and hardworking. Uh, he seems to struggle with this sense of self, and his attraction to other people. He has a very strong sense of justice. He believes in equality for people. Uh, he seems to know what he thinks is right and wrong. He's very intelligent. This is one of his resources. He has a lot of resources. He's hardworking. He is kind of the good kid, that like any teacher would be like, this is my star student. This is the good kid in class. Uh, he describes himself. He has this quote where he says that adults view him as this responsible, honest young man full of integrity and honor who would make us all proud. I was trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind. Uh, for him, he puts a lot of emphasis on this, like, I'm gonna make my town, my family, the adults in my life proud. Uh, Adults trust him and they view him as this role model and as an all around, like, this is a good kid. This is the kid that you want your kid to hang out with. Okay. So how does that affect John's treatment by others? Uh, John has really no close friends. He kind of keeps peers at an arm's length. His family doesn't discuss feelings. It seems that he struggles a lot to talk about his feelings. Uh, He has no motivation really for a sexual or romantic leadership relationship with other people. And that leads him uh, to be around all of these like guys his age, especially other Boy Scout leaders who kind of insinuate that he is gay because of that. Uh, he describes himself as like always being a very good listener, that he likes to listen to other people talk about their feelings, discuss how they feel, but he struggles a lot with kind of communicating that himself, it seems. So context is our next lens. So how does the environment, how do environmental surroundings affect our individual? So we look at that through Bronfenbrenner's kind of concentric circles and their lenses. So microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. So we're looking at the immediate environment in the microsystem, and all of this is surrounding our child or our adolescent in this case. Mesosystem is that connection between environments. Exosystem, we're looking at indirect environments. So like environments that interact with our microsystem, but maybe not us or our adolescent. Macrosystem is our social and cultural values, and the chronosystem is like changes over time. So overall, like environmental surroundings, how do they affect John? John wants to break out of this small town, and he seems to feel suffocated by the expectations that are put on him by his family and by himself. He's from a wealthy family. He's probably one of the richest families in town, uh, in this very, very poor town. All of these people are pushing him to succeed, get into a good college, make us proud. And all of these adults in John's life see him as the good kid. Okay. Microsystem. So his when I'm looking at his microsystem, I'm looking a lot at his relationship with his parents, and with his brother and sister. John has a relationship with his parents that I think would be described as authoritative. Uh, they provide John a lot of chances to be independent, but they push him to be very highly successful, although they don't really talk about feelings or how the kids kind of interact with their environment and how they feel about stuff. John briefly describes his brother and sister in he spends like one paragraph talking about both of them and then never really brings them up again. John's brother is a successful musician. He's in college, but he really doesn't want to live in John's shadow. John is the oldest sibling of the three, uh, and he tries really hard to be different visually from his brother. So John's brother wears all black and he dresses kind of in like what we consider like a goth or emo style. Uh, Tries to look very different from John. And his sister's very outgoing and she has a lot of friends, which we see as different from John because he can't seem to connect with peers in that way. Okay, his mesosystem, we don't hear a whole lot about it, but we do know that teachers from his public school, when he originally went to public school in his town, advocated to John's parents to put him in a school for gifted and talented students. And this forces him into a school where he's the only person from his town, and it makes him more socially isolated. Uh, in the exosystem, John's grandfather could be considered one of his microsystems as well. But I want to include it in the exosystem because it kind of shows how the community interacts with John and how John interacts with his larger community, and his like kind of cultural background. John's grandfather runs like a coal business slash like oil, uh, and he watches his grandfather foster community in their town. He runs oil deliveries, and he delivers oil to people even when they can't afford it. His grandfather would like to sit in people's living rooms and talk to them, and listen to their problems. He would buy their baked goods and their homemade things. He would go to local government and advocate on people's behalf. And I think that John gets this very strong moral compass and this need for mentorship from watching his grandfather and going out and doing these things with his grandfather. Okay, John's greater context, his like macro system, is that he's operating as someone who believes very strongly in equality, and in a church that we would describe as affirming and accepting of LGBTQIA plus people, uh, while also existing in a world where Matthew Shepard was murdered and in a church that isn't always accepting and affirming, and in the Boy Scouts, which was actively trying to rid itself of gay members. So we're looking at time here. How does the historical context affect the individual? And what I'm going to talk about here is the death of Matthew Shepard, because this seems to have a very large impact on John. Uh, and this death of Matthew Shepard really makes John rethink his place in his church and on his campus. And he kind of thinks about like, can I do more good inside the church, making change inside the church? Uh, or do I need to be doing things from outside the church? Where can I have the greatest impact? Uh, so the death of Matthew Shepard, just for some background, if you're unaware, in 1998, Matthew Shepard, who was a college student at the University of Wyoming, was convinced to get into a truck by two other guys, uh, and he was beaten with the butt end of a gun, and left to die while tied to a fence, like miles outside of town. He's found the next morning, but a few days later in the hospital, he died of his injuries. He was specifically targeted because he was gay. Uh, and across the country after this event, you have people who are holding vigils, and John's college campus is one of these places that is holding a vigil for Matthew Shepard, and that's where he hears these stories of all of these other students who are minorities on campus who have endured harassment or assault uh, at this campus. And John is sitting there and he goes to give a speech, and he just doesn't really know what to say. He knows what he wants to say, but that's very different from what the church would tell him to say. And it puts him in this kind of weird place. So putting it all together, what can we say about John's development based on the PPCT model? Uh, So John grows up in a family that doesn't discuss their feelings, but he watches his grandfather, who often listens to people talk about their problems and advocates for them and their problems. And this carries over into his later adolescence, where he struggles to form deep mutual connections with others, but he enjoys mentoring and listening to people and ministering to them. He knows how to like kind of give to people, but he doesn't know how to take back. John is incredibly intelligent. He's very responsible. Uh, and he's put on this pedestal by his community as this model teen. And it causes John to have this crisis of identity of who is he outside of being a role model. John's environment teaches him to place a really high emphasis on community and advocacy, and it causes him to believe in an affirming church and to push for supporting the LGBTQIA community. And what is he going to do? And that's kind of the question he's left with is, what do I do now? Like, this is the struggle of my lifetime, is what does being a Christian in this church mean for me? John Street is someone who should be respected and trusted by adults in his early adolescence, and he carries that into uh, a sense of duty and responsibility to his church and to his community to make everyone proud. And those are my references. Okay, thank you so much for listening, and put any questions down in the comments, please. Thank you, and I hope you have a good couple days.